Another topic we haven't talked about, big settlement with Toyota. $1.2 billion with the government. Harsh words from Eric Holder, the Attorney General, saying Toyota was involved in a cover-up. David Welna?
Yeah, Toyota neglected to publicly acknowledge that it had a problem with the accelerator in several of its models, and these accelerators were getting stuck because of a piece of plastic in the accelerator, and people lost their lives as a consequence. And meanwhile, Toyota was publicly saying, "Oh, it might be the floor mat that's the problem, or it might be the drivers themselves." And this fine that it got of $1.2 billion. It's the biggest that the auto industry has ever gotten, was a real wake-up call. That said, $1.2 billion is only 2% of Toyota's cash on hand. They have $60 billion on hand. It doesn't hurt their bottom line that much. There was not one Toyota executive who faced criminal prosecution in this case. Nobody personally is going to pay the price for this.
Rachel Smokin, this also comes just as Congress is taking a hard look at General Motors for all the recalls and the time it took to deal with this ignition problem and the cobalts and some other problems with other vehicles. And the CEO is being called to testify to Congress.
That's the real question, is what happens next for GM, and that's the subject on everybody's mind. Eric Holder did not mention GM, but his very tough language about Toyota, shameful, blatant disregard for the law, certainly raises those questions. He framed this settlement as a model moving forward, and said it would be also a model for the department's new, more aggressive, more vigilant approach.
What do you expect when Mary Barra, the CEO of General Motors, goes to testify on the Hill, John?
I think she'll get an extremely tough ride. I mean, she benefits from the fact that she's taken over a GM relatively recently, and so she doesn't necessarily own all the problems in the past. That said, there's some really, really serious problems. GM knew about these problems, which, by the way, have caused a lot of crashes and even a fair few deaths, these problems with the ignition switches. It knew about them in the mid-2000s and didn't do very much about it. I mean, you would have thought that following the Toyota model, GM would be hit with an absolutely enormous fine, lots of lawsuits and so on. I suspect politically there's a certain reluctance to pile further misery on GM and on Detroit, which is already in a pretty tough situation. But I mean, if you said Toyota's the model, then you'd expect GM to get whacked.